The hospital corridor was quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of monitors. Maria moved quickly through the hall, her scrubs worn and faded, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her hands carrying a tray of medications, her eyes scanning the rooms with practiced focus. She didn't notice the footsteps behind her until a deep voice called her name and the air shifted around her. The SEAL Admiral stood at the end of the hall, his uniform immaculate and his posture rigid, commanding respect. The nurses and patients nearby instinctively paused to watch the encounter. He gestured toward her with a faint frown. Curiosity and authority mixed in his gaze. Maria froze for a moment, unsure why someone so important was taking notice of her routine movements, and the suspense coiled in the hallway like a held breath. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking down toward the necklace around her neck, a simple chain with a small pendant that caught the light. He raised an eyebrow and asked about it, his voice low and deliberate, the question hanging in the air. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. She had worn it for years, never telling anyone its true significance. The room seemed to grow colder as she considered how to answer, and the suspense grew thick between them. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the tray, careful to avoid spilling the pills, her eyes meeting his gaze briefly. Her expression calm yet guarded. She spoke softly, saying it was a gift, a memento from someone special. The Admiral narrowed his eyes as if searching for more, the tension stretching longer and heavier than anything she had felt in years, and the suspense tightening like a noose around the corridor. He took another, stepped closer, and asked again why she wore it, what it meant. Maria paused longer this time, a memory flashing in her mind. The hum of a helicopter, the roar of engines in the desert, the shouts of comrades lost, and the weight of survival pressing down. She swallowed hard and replied vaguely, keeping her secret safe for now, the suspense snapping taut because he sensed there was more behind her words than she revealed. The Admiral studied her face carefully, every scar, every line, and every subtle motion. Betraying the story, she carried the nurses and patients pretending to be busy, could feel the tension growing, the air thick with unspoken questions. Maria's chest tightened under the scrutiny, the necklace swinging lightly as she moved, and the suspense coiling tighter because her answer could change everything in that moment. She walked toward the medication room, her steps measured, careful, avoiding eye contact, her heart hammering, the Admiral following silently behind his presence, heavy and commanding the other staff, stealing glances between them, unsure what to do or say. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the beeping machines and faint chatter fading into nothing, the suspense mounting as she approached the door. Inside the medication room, she placed the tray down, her hands shaking ever so slightly. The Admiral standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her, the chain around her neck glinting one last time. She finally reached up and touched it, the gesture automatic, but deliberate, as if weighing whether to reveal the truth, her breath catching in her throat, the suspense thickening because the next moment could reveal everything she had tried to keep hidden. He leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now, asking directly whose dog tag it was. Maria froze, her fingers brushing over the pendant, the metal cold against her skin. She swallowed and whispered a name from the past, the one no one alive should know. The Admiral's eyes widened in recognition, a weight of the revelation hanging between them, the suspense snapping taut as the room seemed to close in around them. The memory hit him like a wave. The missions, the chaos, the camaraderie, the fear and the courage, and suddenly the woman in front of him was no longer just a nurse, a single mother, a civilian. She was a soldier. She had been a SEAL. She had survived and returned home under the radar. Her secret buried under years of life, lived quietly, the suspense thick as the truth settled. In the air, Maria's eyes met his, briefly, a flicker of fear and relief passing between them, the necklace swinging as if to emphasize the moment the Admiral stepped closer, trying to comprehend what he was seeing, her hands trembling slightly as she lowered them to her side. The room silent except for the faint hum of the lights and the beeping monitors, the suspense coiling tighter. Because he realized this woman had carried a past heavier than most could imagine. He asked her softly, "What happened? The missions, the losses, the things no one else would understand." Maria exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down on her. She spoke carefully a few words about survival, about sacrifices, about the cost of service. The Admiral listening, intently, his expression unreadable, the suspense growing because every word she spoke hinted at a story far beyond what the simple chain around her neck could ever show. The room seemed to shrink around them as he pieced it together, every gesture, every scar, every subtle twitch. The realization washing over him, the nurse standing before him, had faced what few could endure, and had returned not seeking glory, but simply to live her life. The suspense tightened, as if the air itself were holding, its breath waiting for what he would do next. Finally, he straightened slightly, his gaze unwavering. He nodded subtly, his respect clear, even if unspoken. Maria felt a shift in the tension, a release yet still heavy with awe. The staff outside the door, whispering quietly, the story already beginning to ripple through the hospital, the suspense lingering because everyone knew something extraordinary had just been revealed. She stepped back from the counter, her hands brushing the chain one last time. Before letting it rest against her chest, the Admiral's eyes never leaving hers. He finally spoke softly, acknowledging her service, the sacrifices, the courage, the years of silent heroism, her lips pressing into a small, tight smile of relief and exhaustion. The suspense snapping taut, because no one could yet imagine the full story she carried inside her. The hospital lights flickered faintly as the Admiral stepped closer, Maria's fingers brushing the dog tag as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She didn't move to hide it, her gaze steady, though her chest rose and fell rapidly. The weight of years pressed on them both, and the suspense tightened as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, his voice firm but tinged with disbelief. "You shouldn't be a nurse. You should have been gone years ago." Maria's lips pressed together. Her eyes flickered toward the nearest room where a child lay asleep in a hospital. Dead. Then back to him. "I had to come back. Someone had to be here. I couldn't leave them." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "Someone? You mean all of us? We thought you were gone, Maria Ortiz. You were supposed to be dead." She swallowed hard, her hand brushing the chain again. "I wasn't dead, I had to survive. I made it out, but everyone else didn't. That's why I'm here. I couldn't go back until now." He studied her face. Every scar, every tiny twitch told the story of missions. Lost comrades, left behind sleepless nights, and battles fought far from anyone's knowledge. His mind flashed back to the operations, the chaos, the fires, and the impossible missions. The realization that the woman in front of him had carried all of that into civilian life made the suspense coil even tighter. A nurse passed by the doorway, whispering, "Is she really?" The Admiral didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too focused on the truth he had just uncovered. The quiet determination. In her eyes, the calm efficiency, despite the weight of her past. It all clicked into place. The necklace wasn't jewelry, it was a dog tag, a mark of someone who had survived the impossible and returned to live a different life. Suddenly, the hospital. Intercom buzzed with urgency. A convoy of injured personnel was being airlifted in from a nearby mission. An explosion had left soldiers trapped and critically wounded. The Admiral's gaze flicked to Maria instinctively. He could see the same adrenaline. In her posture, the same precision in her movements. He said nothing, but the tension was electric. The suspense heightened, because both of them knew she could handle it. Maria grabbed her gloves and sanitizer, rushing toward the emergency bay. Her movements, fast and calculated. The Admiral followed, but stayed back, letting her take control. Nurses and aides stared in awe as she assessed the incoming soldiers. Her hands flying over monitors and wounds, she barked orders with authority they hadn't seen from anyone before. The suspense stretched because no one yet knew the depth of her skill. A young soldier was wheeled in blood staining his uniform. He was barely conscious. Maria knelt beside him, checking vitals, her hands steady despite the chaos. The Admiral watched from the doorway. Her calm focus contrasted with the panic around them. It reminded him of the missions they had shared years ago. The suspense built because it was clear she wasn't just a nurse, she was a soldier in every sense. "Get me the med kit and the crash cart now," she ordered. The staff moved quickly, obeying her instinctively. Her eyes never left the patient as she worked to stabilize him. The Admiral's mind raced. He hadn't seen this kind of presence since his SEAL days. Her ability to command attention without raising her voice or losing control was remarkable. The suspense heightened as the situation became more critical. Explosions and sirens rang in the distance. Another group of casualties arrived. Maria's hands didn't shake. She triaged, treated, and reassured with the same precision she had used in operations. The Admiral finally stepped closer, speaking softly. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." She glanced up, her face weary but determined. "I'm used to doing it alone. I've survived worse." Her words carried the weight of experience and unspoken losses. The suspense lingered because he realized she had faced death countless times. Yet now here she was, saving lives in a civilian world with the same intensity. Hours passed in a blur. The Admiral stayed close, watching her work through exhaustion. The soldiers and nurses around them had begun to whisper tales of the mysterious single mom nurse who moved like a veteran and acted like a leader. The suspense built as Maria's past and present collided in the hospital corridors. Finally, a lull came. The last wounded were stabilized and moved to recovery. The Admiral approached her fully for the first time. The exhausted nurse removed her gloves and touched. The dog tag lightly. "I never wanted to come back," she admitted. He studied her expression carefully. "I know, but you did. You survived, and now you're here, helping them." The words were soft, but carried immense respect. The suspense broke, slightly, as they both acknowledged what had just happened between them. Maria exhaled slowly, the weight on her shoulders feeling lighter for the first time in years. "It doesn't feel like survival, it feels like purpose." The Admiral nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder briefly. A gesture of respect, a salute beyond protocol and rank. The suspense lingered in the air because the recognition was mutual, silent, but profound. The staff around them began to murmur quietly. The legend of Maria Ortiz was spreading in whispers of awe and disbelief. The SEAL Admiral and the single mom nurse stood in the middle of it all, united by shared history and silent understanding. The suspense persisted because neither of them yet knew what the next challenge would bring. A call came over the radio, another mission, another emergency needing attention. Maria looked at the Admiral, determination burning in her eyes. "I go," she said simply. He nodded without hesitation. "I thought you'd never say anything else." His respect absolute, his disbelief tempered by trust. The suspense remained taut because the night was far from over, and her skill, courage, and experience were about to be tested once again. The desert wind whipped against the hospital walls as night fell, carrying the distant roar of engines and the faint echo of gunfire. Maria's hands were steady, her eyes sharp as she organized supplies and prepared for the next wave of wounded soldiers. Every movement was precise, born of years in the field. The SEAL Admiral watched silently from the doorway, his uniform immaculate but his mind racing. He could see it now. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a warrior. A call came over the radio. A convoy under fire, trapped miles outside the base. Maria's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with purpose. She grabbed her bag and ran, her dog tag glinting faintly in the dim light. The Admiral hesitated, then followed, knowing she would move like a storm through danger. The staff behind them stepped back, whispering about the single mom who moved like a seal, carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone who had faced death and returned. The convoy was a scene of chaos. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air. Soldiers crouched behind wrecked vehicles, shouting over the din of explosions. Maria didn't hesitate. She moved low and fast, assessing the situation with a trained eye. Her hands worked to stabilize injured soldiers while her gaze scanned for threats. The Admiral's heart pounded as he realized she was doing what only someone trained in combat could do, her past skills merging seamlessly with her present purpose. A soldier cried out, trapped beneath a vehicle. Maria sprinted to him, crouched, and lifted the wreckage with a strength and precision that left the Admiral momentarily speechless. Her hands were steady as she checked the man's vitals, calming him with soft words as if she had years of experience in both the battlefield and the hospital ward. The other soldiers began following her lead, inspired by her fearlessness. Gunfire erupted from the ridge above. Maria grabbed a rifle from a fallen Marine and returned fire, suppressing the enemy long enough for the convoy to begin retreating. Every shot was calculated, every movement deliberate. The Admiral's eyes widened as he watched the nurse he had once dismissed as ordinary take command of the battlefield. The suspense was unbearable. No one could predict what she would do next, yet every action was flawless, hours blurred into chaos and precision. Maria moved like a phantom, dragging the wounded, covering retreating soldiers, and returning fire. The dog tag around her neck caught the light as she shifted her weight, a reminder of the life she had once led and the sacrifices she had made. The Admiral's respect deepened with every second. He had trained elite warriors, and yet here she was, surpassing every expectation with courage and skill that could only come from experience, determination, and a will to survive. Finally, the last of the convoy was safe. Maria collapsed against the hood of a vehicle, exhaustion etched into her features. The Admiral reached her side, breathing heavily, his uniform dirty but his eyes full of awe. "You saved them all," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I did what I had to," she replied, brushing the dust and sweat from her face. Her hands reached instinctively for her dog tag, holding it lightly as if grounding herself. "I've done worse and survived. This is nothing." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, the weight of recognition heavy between them. "I thought you were gone," he said. "I thought we lost you." Maria's gaze met his, calm but edged with pain and pride. "I survived for them. I survived for my son. I survived for myself. That's why I'm here." For a long pause, they stood together amidst the quiet of the desert night, surrounded by soldiers who were too stunned to speak. The legend of Maria Ortiz, the single mom, the nurse, the warrior, was now undeniable. The Admiral finally straightened, his respect absolute. Without a word, he removed his cap, placed it under his arm, and saluted her. Maria, exhausted yet resolute, returned the gesture with a small, knowing smile. Around them, the soldiers held their breath, witnessing the recognition of someone who had lived through unimaginable trials and returned stronger than anyone could imagine. The dog tag glimmered in the moonlight, a silent testament to the life she had lived and the sacrifices she had endured. The convoy began moving again, but Maria lingered a moment longer, catching her breath, her eyes scanning the horizon. The Admiral walked beside her, silent, understanding that some heroes don't wear medals in plain sight. They carry their valor quietly, in scars, in stories unspoken, in dog tags hidden beneath layers of civilian life. She looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I'm done proving myself," she said softly. He shook his head, smiling despite the dust and fatigue. "You've already proven more than anyone could ever measure." The night air carried the faint scent of smoke and oil, but it also carried something new: respect, awe, and the quiet echo of a story that would be remembered. Maria Ortiz, the SEAL-turned nurse, the single mother, The hero, hidden in plain sight, had returned from the shadows, and for the first time in years, the Admiral felt that some legends do not vanish. They wait quietly for the moment the world needs them again.